Hi, my name is Alan. I'm a business designer, and welcome to the Beyond Users podcast, where we learn about business to become better designers who not only solve user challenges but also achieve business goals. In many companies, designers do not prepare the product roadmap. We are handed a feature list and expected to just do it. But we've all been in situations where we felt that what we're working on just isn't right. But how do you push back? How do you correctly recognize what to create? For example, does a hobby runner, somebody running for fun, want a better running shoe, or do they just want to be faster? Or do they want to lose some weight? Because if we understand correctly what people want, what is their job to be done, we can work on the right solution. And this solution might be a different product which requires a completely different set of features. So as you've probably already recognized, a great framework that we're going to talk about in this podcast is called Jobs to be Done. So it promises us to identify the right customer jobs, so the right customer goals, so what people really want to do, prioritize our product roadmap, and also speak the language that business better understands. So it gives us the language to push back when we feel like what we're building is not the right thing. So to help us better understand this framework, I spoke with Jim Kalbach. So Jim is a noted author, speaker, and instructor in design. And he's also head of customer experience at Mural, the leading online whiteboard. So he recently wrote a book called The Jobs to be Done Playbook, which is coming out in early April. So we spoke about the different chapters in the book, basically how did Jim first encounter the framework, how he uses it in his own work, how to do interviews to basically create job stories, and how it basically can drive the product prioritization and business strategy talks in our company. So now, without further ado, here is a conversation with Jim. So, Jim, I thought it's going to be maybe interesting to talk about just when did you learn about Jobs to be Done framework? How did you get to know it? And then also, what is it? What is Jobs to be Done?
Right. Yeah. So I think it was about 2003 or 2004. A guy named Tony Ulwick, who's a pioneer in Jobs to be Done, wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review that I picked up. It's how to innovate around customers. I can't think of the exact title of that, but at the time, I was squarely in a design team at the time, thinking about user-centered design and journey mapping and all that good stuff. And it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks what he was talking about. Because he was essentially talking about user needs, human needs, but from a business standpoint. He doesn't come from design. A lot of the Jobs to be Done literature, they're not designers, right? So Jobs to be Done is not a design discipline in origin, and it just, for me, there was just a big click that design can inform business and vice versa as well too. And it was that article, and then I just started getting very interested in it, dabbled in it myself in my own work from there, and started reading all of the literature, everything that I could, and tried to practice it on the job as much as possible there. So I have over a decade of experience with the literature, but also in my job trying to put things into practice. And for me, Jobs to be Done is there's lots of different perspectives out there. So if you Google the topic, you might get into kind of some confusing or messy ground, given the sources that are out there. But for me, Jobs to be Done is, I see it as a way of seeing a market, right? I know there are lots of methods and techniques out there, but for me, it's a mindset, it's a perspective, and it's a perspective to focus on human problems independent of your solution. So for me, Jobs to be Done, and I call it jobs thinking in my book. It's really a flip of perspective. Nice. From taking your brand, taking your product, taking all the assumptions you have, taking the ego out of the landscape that you're trying to model and then design for. You take all of that out and you truly look at it from the individual's perspective. What are they trying to get done? And then Jobs to be Done provides a language and a way to look at human outcomes. How do people see them it's a model for how people see themselves without your product or your brand in the mix. So for me, it was a way to kind of shift perspectives and say, okay, we have, a go-to-market motion, marketing, and a product and a solution. What are the people trying to get done? Let's start there and then work back towards the solution, right? So for me, it was really a language and an exploration around the outcomes that people have and the problem space, as I call it. For me, it's a problem space language and way of seeing.
So you were mentioning user needs. So what's the difference between a user need and a job to be done?
Okay, that's a good question. And I've struggled with this myself. The way that I see it, and again, you might find different opinions out there. I see a job as an objective. It's the thing that people are trying to get done, and that can be just very, very straightforward and simple. So if you're an attendee of a conference, the job you're trying to get done is attend a conference. It's that simple. But it's not the goal. It's actually a process. So I look at the job to be done as the process of trying to do that, right? It's the whole thing. It's the beginning, middle, and end of that. But for me, the job to be done is the objective. The need is the success criteria that you get from doing that you need from that job. Right. So one thing that like I said, jobs to be done is a language to look at outcomes. It actually separates that objective from, well, what do you need in the context of doing that job? So for me, a need would be if I'm attending a conference, just to use an example there, right? I want to increase the amount of contacts that I make there for my network, or I want to increase my contact with new topics. Maximize the learning that I get. So you can look at a need in relation to that objective. But there is a language and there is a technique for actually separating those things. The objective and the needs from those objectives are separated in jobs to be done language, at least from my perspective.
So why is this concept so powerful? Why is working with jobs to be done instead of the user wants and needs? Why is that better for designers and also for developers and others?
I don't know if it's better. There's a lot of hype around jobs to be done. There's a lot of contention around jobs to be done. Yeah. People who have been doing user-centered design for a while, and I have, say, yeah, but we did task analysis 20 years ago, or go out and read goal-directed design from Alan Cooper, and they're all offended that jobs to be done overlaps with what they're doing. And the reality is, it does overlap. It for me, it's just it's a different flavor of a lot of things that have been developed in human-centered design fields for the past 3-4 decades. And jobs to be done does have a long history as well too. Over 20-30 years, people have been looking at things from this way. I think jobs to be done does have some differences. One of them is it really takes the solution out of the equation, right? You're not necessarily looking at things through the lens of your product or your solution, and the goal isn't necessarily to build something either, right? Because jobs to be done, for me, jobs to be done can be used in customer success, marketing, business strategy, all kinds of things. Jobs to be done is not a design technique, right? So it overlaps with design techniques, but I think it's broader than that, right? So I think jobs to be done is powerful in that way, is that it's a way that a whole organization can be user-centered without having to put a design label on any of the techniques, right? So that's one thing that's really powerful for me. And the book that I have coming out in April, I basically take that approach. I show that jobs thinking, or the perspective that you get from working with jobs to be done, can be applied across an organization, right? And no one team or discipline owns it either. And I talk to a lot of marketing, customer success people these days that are seriously looking into jobs to be done as a guiding light for them. The other big thing for me about jobs to be done is, as I just mentioned, it comes from the business side of things. Right. And as a designer, capital W, capital D for designer, we've been pounding our fist on the table for a long time saying, we want a seat at the table, listen to us. We think we can help business. We're not just about aesthetics, right? We've been saying that for a very long time. And for me, jobs to be done is an opportunity. I don't understand the resistance to jobs to be done from the design community, to be honest with you, because it's something that can help us actually get our message. It's a different package of that message, right? It's not task analysis, that was developed 20 years ago, but it's similar. But it's a vehicle to speak with with business partners on their turf, right? So for me, it actually helps our cause, and I don't know why more people aren't embracing it in the design field, actually.
So how can somebody listening to this podcast try and test the job to be done framework right away today?
Right away today. Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a lot of methods and techniques out there. A lot of them are kind of owned and run by consultants, and they have their own process. And what I tried to do in the book was atomize jobs to be done and just break it down into individual techniques. Because as a designer myself, sometimes I didn't necessarily need a big long process that required a budget and time. I just wanted to solve the problem I had in front of me, and I thought jobs thinking could help, and I just wanted to do a little bit of it. And that's kind of what I do. That's why I call it the jobs to be done playbook, because I break things down into small individual little tasks and activities, techniques, but then I also show how you can put those together to make an entire process. So it's really about identifying what is first of all, you have to understand what's the problem, the situation that you're in. Are you trying to write a marketing message, or design a product interface, or develop a roadmap, or come up with a strategy, right? And then there are a range of techniques that you can use to inject jobs thinking into that activity. One simple thing that I think is very self-contained and easy to work with is writing job stories. You might have heard of the job stories technique. It's a very loose technique, so it's hard to get that wrong, quote unquote, because there's almost no right to it, because it's been interpreted and reinterpreted so many times. It's just a very flexible technique. But if you go and check out job stories, and that's something you can go and look at research maybe that you've done and say, oh, I'm going to analyze the findings through the lens of a job story, right? So I'm going to generate job stories from the research that I did, and then take those job stories and bring those into a grooming session, or a design sprint, or a regular and agile sprint, right? So then you have this little self-contained little packet of information using the job story format that is portable. You can bring that around your project and bring it into your team. So if you want to get started right away, that's one of the easiest things that you can do, is just go look at job stories, write a couple job stories, see how you can bring that into your work.
So let's take this further. And now let's imagine that, I'm a designer working on a specific feature of a specific product.
Yeah.
And this product has a certain job, obviously, to be done. Yeah. But when I write these job stories that you just mentioned, I figure out that actually, I'm selling a product, but the job to be done is much bigger. It's much broader. Yeah. And it feels like, I'm just working on this little small clock, and maybe even this is not helping in the whole aspect, because this person could use a different way to do the same job. Right. How do you reconcile this as a designer? Does that mean I shouldn't be working on this feature, or how do I use this in my for my own advantage?
I understand the situation. Well, one answer is maybe you shouldn't be working on that feature, and I think that's one. That's one positive effect of jobs thinking, is that it makes you really question, how did we prioritize this thing? Why did we prioritize this thing? And as you know, as a designer, sometimes things do come down onto your plate that actually aren't user-centered features or help the user. So jobs thinking can help you push back in that way as well too. But one of the things that you mentioned, kind of hidden in your question there, was this notion of granularity, or level of altitude, right? And it's one of the things in that's that you struggle with when you work jobs. I still struggle with it when I work with jobs to be done, is at what level of altitude should I be working? And the real answer is jobs to be done functions at any level of altitude, right? So you can say, what's the job to be done of this clock that I'm building inside of my app, like you just said, right? and it might be something, might be something around, keeping on time, or, ensuring that you finish the task within a given amount of time, that kind of thing. But that's in the context of the bigger job that your solution gets done, or that people are trying to get done, I should say, rather that way, which then itself might be in the context of a much bigger solution, right? Like people want to improve their careers or something like that. And why do they want to do that? It's so that they have a happier home life, right? So you can just keep going up this hierarchy until you get to love and happiness, right? Because it always ends there, right? But let's take it down even just one level. Is like, what is the value proposition of your entire brand and company? Let's just say, I'm just making this up. Let's just say it's to improve people's careers, right? And now you're a designer and you're working on a clock, and you're like, how does my clock help people improve their careers, right? There's a ladder of steps that you need to go up and down to get from there to there. So I think the thing to do is to recognize that and to break it down. So what I would suggest is to actually go down, right? If you create a job story like I just recommended, and it's too high, like you're working on a clock and it's like, I want to improve my career. You can always break it down, right? It down to the level that you need, but in a way that still maintains that job perspective, which is, it's not about the solution, it's about the objective that people are trying to get done. So what's the objective that people are trying to get done? Not the feature, what's the objective? And you can always bring it down to the level that you're trying to work at.
One thing you mentioned in your answer was pushing back. So using this job story or just the whole framework to push back on the product roadmap or prioritization of certain features. So how could this framework help you push back and explain we shouldn't be working on the clock because of this and that reason?
Right. Yeah. Pushback might be, and I also said earlier too, pounding your fist, that, those might not be the right attitude. And it's actually not the perspective that I've ever taken. I always just tried to show people a different perspective, a different view on the thing that we were trying to accomplish together, right? And let them come to their own conclusion as well too. And I think that's what a lot of the techniques inside of Jobs to Be Done do. If you create a job map or do interviewing, there's specific interviewing techniques, or write job stories. The idea is, if you inject this into your team, that the team and the people in the team will come to the realization themselves that they don't need a clock. Mm-hmm. Right. So you don't necessarily have to say, hey, you're crazy. People don't need a clock. I have my science and my beliefs, because then you're just butting heads and it's belief against belief. You want to use this in a way that people, they come to their own conclusion. I actually say one success criteria, success metric for designers should be when your stakeholders and your teammates are using your language. Right. So like they've adopted your way, then we win, right? You win if the product manager starts showing personas and talking about Jobs to Be Done, we win, right? So I see Jobs to Be Done as a way not to push back like, hey, you're wrong, but to say, hey, here's another perspective. Are you interested in that perspective? Oh, and maybe we can together come to a different conclusion.
So it's getting your team basically to adopt your mindset and also processes, right?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
So in the book, you talk about two different ways of doing interviews to basically analyze jobs to be done by your customers. So can we maybe quickly talk about these jobs interviews and switch interviews? Sure. So how do you conduct them, and what's the difference, and when to use which one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do talk about two ways of interviewing: jobs interviews, I call them, on the one side, and then the switch interview, which is a technique that's kind of codified out there already. And I kind of see it as working forward versus working backwards. And by that, I mean, in a jobs interview, you're not coming out with any assumptions or brand or product or preconceived notions about a solution. You're talking, your starting point is talking to people about what they're trying to get done and trying to find their objective, right? So you're kind of trying to work forward to, okay, you're working in this context. What are you actually trying to get done? And you kind of start broad and then narrow it down to this nugget of information. This is your objective. This is your job to be done. And here are the needs that you have around that job to be done. And then that becomes a springboard into creating a solution that solves for that problem. With switch interviews, by the way, sorry, just to go back to jobs interviews, a lot of that resembles, you might know, contextual inquiry and kind of open interviewing. It's a lot of that qualitative type of work. It can be directed, though. I think jobs interviews are a little bit more directed than open interviewing in the context of ethnography, for instance. It is directed because you are trying to get to a specific point. But it's similar to that contextual inquiry-like style of interviews. Switch interviews were developed by Bob Mesta and the guys at Rewired Group. And what that does is it starts with a solution, a product, and it even looks at the purchasing moment for that product. And what you do is you use that to reverse engineer, to go backwards, to deduce the job to be done by asking, what happened? Okay, so you bought this product and you used it and you were satisfied or not. What happened before that? Okay, I was looking for a product. Well, what was the thing that got you to look for a product? Okay, and what was the thing before that? And what was the thing before that? So you work backwards to the point where you're not talking about your product anymore, right? So, but the product is the launch point into the conversation about the jobs to be done. So it's kind of working forward versus working backwards. And you can get to the same point. And in fact, I've heard and talked to a lot of people that use a combination of techniques, and they'll use the switch techniques to work backwards, try to deduce the objective that people have and the needs, and then kind of work forward using other techniques. So they're actually combining different techniques to do that. Yeah. But it does. I think the big point there is it does start with research. Right? You shouldn't just go into a room and say, hey, I'm going to create a job map, or let's brainstorm job stories. Let's just make crap up, right? So it does begin with some type of qualitative interviewing. It can get quantitative later, but it does start with some type of qualitative interviewing. And whether it's a jobs interview, as I described, or switch, you have to determine what's best for you.
So with all of these open interview style interviews, usually the questions are not predetermined, but I feel like a lot of the times you go back to certain way of asking, or maybe even certain most important questions that you need to ask. So I'm just wondering whether there is any, like fundamental things you have to cover in a jobs interview.
Yeah. I think you do start trying to look at the process. So I think some of the questions, and you'll see this in the switch interview as well too, is on the one hand, it can be chronological. Okay, so you did that thing yesterday. What did you do before that? And what did you do before that as well too? As I said, I see an objective as a process. So one of the mindsets as the interviewer that you have to have is you're trying to uncover this process around the objective, right? So you're going to ask, what did you do before that, and what did you do after that, right? I think the other thing that you have to start asking is, well, why did you do that as well too? And you can actually steer the granularity of your questioning by asking why. If you ask why, you go up in abstraction, and then if you ask how, you actually get more specific. So if somebody says, I checked my email, okay, that's a very specific task. You want to say, well, why did you do that, right? And so, I'm looking for critical messages from my customer. Well, why do you need to do that? Because that's a key part of my job is, being able to do that. So why, you go up in granularity, and how, right? So you need to look at the chronology, and then asking why and how. So you go left to right with chronology, and then why and how to go up and down in granularity. The third thing that you can think about when you're doing a jobs interview as well too is using something called the critical incident technique. Rather than asking generic questions and getting generic questions back, like, why do you check your email? Oh, I like to, prioritize my work before the day. You ask, what did you do yesterday? So you ask for a specific point in time so that you get specific answers back. Because one thing in open interviewing, people start theorizing about the ideal answer that they think the interviewer wants to hear. Right, but by asking about, tell me the last time you had a critical message in your inbox, right? That then they start talking about a specific set of circumstances. from there, you can start being generic as well too. But there are techniques like that. So asking on the timeline, asking why and how, and then asking about a specific incident that, if you only have an hour with somebody, that's not enough time actually to kind of cycle through all those different perspectives that you want to get out.
And how many interviews should you have to come up with reliable results?
As many as you can. I'm a pragmatist, and I've been in lots of situations where, like I said, way back in whatever 2003 or 2004, whenever that article came out, I didn't have projects or resources or time to do a lot of this, and I was sneaking some of it into other efforts that I was doing, even something as innocent as a usability test, right? And then, let me ask the user a couple questions before they leave the studio. So I was doing this very covert. It was an extracurricular project, and I was happy to get a handful of interviews, right? Ideally, in my perspective, that's better than none. Some people would argue with me there as well too. Ideally, though, to answer your question more directly, I think ideally you can start seeing patterns at about 6. If I'm doing a serious study, though, I want to get above 10. Like if I really want to go back with results and say, hey, here's the job map, or the process, and here are all the needs. I want to get into the 10 range. I've done studies where I've been more in the 20 to 40 range even. But if you've ever done qualitative interview, you get a ton of data back. If you for every hour of interviewing, that's about 30 pages of transcribed text, right? So if you do 20 interviews, that's 600 pages of text. That's a lot of data to go through, right? So when you're talking about qualitative interviewing, sample size 20, that's a lot of work.
And once you do 10, 20, 30 interviews, how does the synthesis look like? I mean, first of all, what is the process of synthesis? And second of all, once you have the results, what's the format in which you share it with the team?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the answer is, once you have that qualitative data, let's say you have 600 pages of qualitative text, there's a lot of things you can do with that, right? You can generate all kinds of models. You can go to the book Contextual Inquiry and start generating all of their models that they have from that as well too. You can generate personas. So there are lots of things you can do with that qualitative data. But from a jobs perspective, one of the key outputs that I highlight in the book, and I recommend, I would just recommend in general that people do, is create what I call a job map. It's a term that I got from Tony Olwick. Of course, I wrote a book on mapping experiences too, so it's not a coincidence that for me, inside of the jobs to be done field, that I'm attracted to the jobs map or job map. But the job map is basically a chronological visualization, boxes and arrows of the process of getting that job done. And that, for me, becomes a springboard into conversations that you can have with the team. So you can take your little clock feature and say, where does this fit in the job map, right? We're doing this. Yeah, but if we don't have the thing before that or after that, it doesn't matter if I have a clock. We also need these other things, and it helps you contextualize the thing that you're doing, and also give you confidence, I think, by kind of laddering up. So you do the research, and one of the key outputs for me is a job map that lets you then orient the actual solution that you're building to that job map. So you can see, are we focused on getting the job done early in the job or later in the job? Where's our opportunity? You can map job stories back to that as well too. You can even look at little features and say, where does that fit into the user's job? What are they trying to do with that? And how does that fit into a bigger picture? So for me, a job map would be a key outcome, but it could also be job stories. There could be personas in there as well too. There could be lots of different formats. It depends on the formality of your research, right? If you're just working in a startup, you could do these jobs interviews and then have a whiteboard in the room with sticky notes, and persona made of sticky notes and a job map made of sticky notes, and that's fine. If you're going to present this research to the CEO of a bank, you're going to want a more formal output as well too. So the output depends too.
Right. So are there any, maybe just to make this a little bit more concrete, do you have any story, case study, example of what you or another team that have used the jobs to be done framework what did they find out, and how did this affect the product, the company at large?
Yeah, sure. The head of product design at Mural, the company that I work for, is also interested in jobs to be done. And we have a blog post. I can send this over so we can include it in the podcast too. A blog post where he outlines very briefly, doing some jobs research up front, and then we created a job map, which I use in my work, which is customer experience and customer success. But from a product side, what they do is they use that to help prioritize the roadmap as well too. So they break down a backlog and try to align it to the job map, and then from there generate job stories. And then from there, you can take a subset of job stories and bring that into a sprint as well too. And the idea is to ground your sprint or even your feature, to ground it in that original research and have a traceable path. So we did the research, we came up with the model, which is a job map. From that, we derived a prioritization. From that, we derived the actual features. But while you're working on that feature, and we actually touched on this exact point in the beginning of the interview. You're sitting there staring at a feature that you got to implement. I got to add a clock to this app, right? You want to know, how does this fit into the bigger picture? And by tying your roadmap and your prioritization and the feature sets all the way back to the job map, which is anchored in the research, you as a designer have confidence that what you're doing is grounded in reality.
But does that mean that jobs or tasks that are closer to the biggest job to be done are the ones that need to be prioritized? Like, should the clock be deprioritized because it's further away from the main thing?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
So how do you prioritize then?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are other vectors that come into prioritization as well too. Effort, right? You're right there, right?
Yeah.
The clock might be something that's easy to do but has a big impact on getting the job done, right? So you might prioritize that thing because of its ease of implementation. I mean, there are lots of other things. I think brand and strategy also come into play as well too. At some point in time, all of this research has to smack up against other frameworks inside of the organization as well too, and you start looking at competitors as well too. Well, our competitor is going into a different direction than we are, and the clock for us is actually an anchor into a new differentiating section. I'm not going to say the clock is the differentiator. It's not, but the clock might start representing a new way of differentiating, right? So market differentiation, strategy, brand, effort, all of these things come into prioritization as well too. I think the jobs vector is just one of them. The thing is, that's very often missing in a lot of our prioritization exercises, that view, right? It's easy to prioritize by effort. It's easy to prioritize by strategy or what the CEO wants, right? It's about bringing that other dimension into the field. And sometimes you'll get some very clear and big wins as well too, because you'll say, "Holy crap! If we didn't have that other perspective, that jobs thinking view, right? We would have missed the importance of that thing, right?" So it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all your problems. It's not going to make decisions for you. Jobs to be done does not make decisions for you, right? In fact, it might make decision making even harder, right? It definitely adds complexity, right, to things as well too. But I think it's up to us to embrace that complexity on behalf of the individual, the human side of it, the user side of it, right? That's what we need to do. By saying, "Hey, we want to be user centered," we're actually injecting complexity back into decision making. And we can't back off from that either.
Yeah, but I think it's a good bridge for designers to make from just customer perspective to the business, because it kind of explains how these two work together.
Absolutely.
I'm actually really glad you mentioned strategy, because that's another part of the book that really intrigued me. I think it's chapter 7. I forgot the exact chapter, but the subchapter in there is job to be done growth strategy matrix. Basically, this is where job to be done and strategy thinking kind of start colliding. Can you explain a little bit more about this matrix and just in general how job to be done can help us think strategically?
Sure, sure. First of all, before I talk about that specifically, I want to say that the book is a collection of methods that are already out there in the field. I'm not saying, hey, I have my new way of doing jobs thinking. What I wanted to do was collect practices that are out there already, put them all in one place, and kind of position them or relativize them against each other. First of all, and the reason why I say that is because the strategy growth matrix, the jobs to be done strategy growth matrix, is a very specific technique that Tony Ulwick developed with his company called Stratagen. And I reference this in the book. I give them full credit for it. But it's basically about trying to come up with a typology of strategies, which exist out there already. You might have seen like the BCG growth matrix or the Ansoff matrix and things like that. And all of those have kind of a total addressable market kind of view on things, dollar signs or number of eyeballs that you're going to address, right? And what this is, it's a way to come up with to categorize different types of strategies, but based on the jobs that people are trying to get done, right? So you can then say, hey, we want to have a solution that targets a type of a job as kind of a strategic vector for your company as well, too. So that's the other thing, too, that I think differentiates jobs to be done from similar techniques in design. As I said before, jobs thinking can be applied to any discipline in an organization: support, customer success, sales, marketing, any of those. But as also this strategic component as well too, I think is also what differentiates it from similar design techniques as well too. It gets kind of complex and a little bit theoretical. It's abstract to some degree and difficult to drive. I don't want to say it's easy to base your strategy on jobs thinking. It requires a lot of unthinking. And high-powered consultants like Tony Ulwick can go in there and kind of do that. So it's probably unrealistic that you're going to kind of go in and, to your executives and say, hey, we're going to base our strategy on this. However, I think for me, again, like we said before, it's about trying to bring that perspective to the table. And Jobs to be Done lets us bring a human-centered perspective even to the corporate strategy table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just looking at this matrix, so the specifically Job to be Done growth strategy matrix, what we have is two axes, right? So one is about, on one axis we have how well does a certain product get the job done, so worse or better, and on the x-axis we have how much the company is charging, right?
Right.
Then, yeah. I mean, and then we have basically 4 or 5 different strategies based on that. One is differentiated strategy, like win underserved customers only. Then we have discrete strategy, where we can win customers with limited options, etc. But it's interesting to me how basically taking this concept of job to be done can actually identify certain gaps in the market beyond, as you said yourself, beyond the total addressable market. How big is the market? Where these companies are competing geographically, and we go into the space of how well are they getting the job done, and how much are they charging for that, right?
Exactly, and in what way are they getting the job done, and things like that. A lot of companies grow these days by acquisition, and I've been I've worked in large companies that were acquiring other companies at a rate of one per quarter and things like that. And certainly if you get to a really big organization like IBM or SAP, they're acquiring like one company a month, right? And this, and obviously the people in strategy and business development in those companies, they're looking at the total landscape, right, of where do they want to move the business. And there's probably lots of different matrices and things that they're using to decide what company they're going to buy. And again, this is just another way to kind of either justify or refute a hypothesis around why would we buy that company. And so, well, they get a different job done than we do, or that shifts the job target that our solutions kind of address and things like that. So I think it's another perspective. It makes this now it's a cube, or a cube with 9 sides. This thing that you can kind of turn and look at it from different perspectives. And it doesn't say, you know what, jobs to be done doesn't say give up all your other strategy techniques. And it doesn't say give up all your other design techniques, right? You still do usability testing and prototyping and make a persona and make a journey map. All of those things still go, but you can add this new perspective to it. And that's why I said, at the beginning of the podcast here too, I see jobs to be done as a perspective, not as a technique or a method. It's a way of seeing, and you can borrow any of these exercises or activities to help inject some of that thinking into your current project.
Perfect. So Jim, thanks a lot for sharing the very specific knowledge with us in this podcast. Maybe just as a final question, like when is your book coming out? Where can we get the early copies or pre-order them? And what are you most excited about the book yourself?
Yeah. So the book's going to be out in the beginning of April. I think April 7th is the exact date. Don't quote me on that, but the first week in April, the book should be out. It's being published by Rosenfeld Media. So if you look it up on the Rosenfeld Media website, you can find the book page there, and there is a pre-order button, I believe, where you can pre-order the book there too. It'll be available on Amazon and everywhere else once it's out, but pre-orders are being taken at Rosenfeld Media. That's rosenfeldmedia.com, I believe, is the URL there. Like I said at the beginning too, I've been working in this area for a long time, talking to people, reading a lot, trying different techniques in different companies, different situations for a very long time. I'm starting to feel there's a lot of interest in jobs to be done right now. Like it's kind of like booming almost, I would say. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue, it seems, these days. So I'm kind of excited to engage in a broader conversation. I already have, but I hope after the book comes out, particularly from my perspective, that I have more opportunities to do podcasts like these. That people will invite me to come speak at their company or give a workshop. I have a nice workshop on this, by the way, half day and a day long workshop. It's really fun. People enjoy it. So I hope to be doing more of that. So basically, what I'm looking forward to is just keeping that conversation going and figuring it out together, right? This is a new thing for some people, and it's not going to solve all your problems, but let's figure it out together.
Yeah, once you're deep into the rabbit hole, like when you know so much about a certain topic, you don't know what others are struggling with. So getting some of that feedback is very exciting, right?
Yeah. Well, I learned from that too. One of the things I always say is I learn by, when I give a workshop, I learn so much because somebody asks a simple, innocent question and then you don't have an answer for it. And you're like, oh my God, that's just such a good question. And I didn't think about it. So that's why I say I love engaging in that conversation as well too, because every time I have a dialogue or a conversation or somebody asks a question in a workshop, I learn from that as well too. And we just continue to improve.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again, Jim. And for all the listeners, you can find the links for the book and to also Jim's Twitter profile on the website. So all the links are in there and also on the podcast description in your podcast app. So cool. Thanks again, Jim, for taking the time and sharing the knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Cool. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jim and that you found some useful skills and tips for how you can bridge this gap between design and business. But also I wanted to invite you to the d.MBA. So if you're interested in this intersection and you want to lead design in your company and have better conversations with business leaders in your company, then you should definitely check out the d.MBA, where we basically in 6 weeks go from 0 to 100, basically looking at most important business skills that designers need to prepare you for better consultancy work or better also in-house work. So if you're creating a product in-house. So the next d.MBA is just around the corner. It's going to start at the end of February, but applications will open at the end of January. So if you're interested, definitely sign up for the waiting list, which you can find on beyondusers.com or beyondusers.com/d.MBA. And here's just a quick snippet of our alumni, Rui, who took the d.MBA 3, so the previous intake. So he's explaining a little bit about his experience and what the end result of him taking the d.MBA was.
after working for more than 10 years as a designer and climbing the ladder to become a creative director, I really had to change my conversation with the stakeholders. Like, is a design functional, desirable, and what impact does it have on the business side? So for that matter, the d.MBA kept inspiring me every week, and I could see a real impact week after week, and I could see that I could use the tools as well. So it was very useful, and I could apply it straight away. So the most cool thing is that at the end of the course, it even gave me the confidence to quit my job and start a startup. So who thought about that?